Hello and welcome to Wine Blast with me, Susie Barry, and my husband and fellow master of wine, Peter Richards. And today we're going to be heading off to Hollywood via California. I think that's fair to say, isn't it?
I suppose so. I mean, it's we're definitely going to be having a bit of fun with wine movies and wine movie moments, and not just Hollywood, it has to be said, that's important. But I think we're going to leave that for a bit later on in the programme. And first off, we're going to head to Napa, aren't we?
We are indeed, yep. So it doesn't really need repeating, but 2020 has been quite the year for wine as much as anything. The coronavirus pandemic has hit many wine nations pretty hard, most notably South Africa, where producers lost millions after wine exports and sales were temporarily banned by the government. Then there's been the imposition of punitive tariffs, which have severely disrupted trade. For example, US tariffs on French, German and Spanish wines. And now China acting against Australia.
That's the last thing we needed, wasn't it?
I know.
I mean, it was something like between 100 and 200% tariffs from the Chinese on Australian wines, and 40% of Australian wine exports go to China these days.
I mean, that's just
it's shocking.
crazy.
Even the US
Chinese going to buy Australian wines.
Even the US tariffs of 25% is bad enough.
Yeah, it is. And of course, on a final note, Mother Nature hasn't always played ball this year. The year started with rampant bushfires in Australia, which we did our first programme about, and ended with devastating wildfires in the US, particularly in California.
Yeah, so our very first podcast, Series 1, Episode 1, was on Australia on Fire, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Early 2020. And now we thought we should finish by going back to California, where we've been several times so far in Series 1, but to talk about the fires there. So the fires in California began in August and ran through to October. By the end of September, 7.5 million acres, that's just over 3 million hectares, had burned in the US, around half of that in California. By mid-October, more than 5 million acres, that's just over 2 million hectares, have burned in California, Washington and Oregon. And apparently more than 30 wineries, restaurants and lodges were reported to have been demolished or damaged. This is all sourced from Wine Searcher, which has been doing some fantastic coverage. In Napa and Sonoma alone, 70,000 people were ordered to evacuate, including the whole town of Calistoga.
And this sadly isn't a one-off. Apparently fire frequency and intensity has grown, with damage, particularly to property, escalating all the time. Where still human lives have been endangered and in some cases lost. And of course, you can add on to this the spectre of climate change, with one report stating that the rate of temperature change in California is now higher than it's been in the past 1,000 years.
But it's not all doom and gloom, is it? California and Napa remain
resilient
powerhouses of wine production, making finer wines than ever before, arguably in greater range and diversity of style than ever before.
Absolutely.
There's plenty of adaptability built into the wine growing system, and there's no shortage of talent and ambition to make these things work, are there?
Absolutely not. On which point, one of the state's most historic and reputable wine producers is Chateau Montelena, a beautiful old stone winery right at the top of Napa Valley near the town of Calistoga. It dates back to 1882, but it really shot to fame when its 1973 Chardonnay beat the iconic French classics in their own backyard at the Judgment of Paris in 1976, with fellow Napa winery Stag's Leap wine cellars winning in the red category too. So Napa had finally, certainly arrived on the world wine stage by that point, hadn't they?
Quite a moment, wasn't it? Yeah. So the winery had been taken over by the Barrett family in the late 60s, hadn't it? With the emphasis very much on the kind of European style of age-worthy wine, focusing on Chardonnay and Cabernet. And that ethos, I think it's fair to say, is still in place to this day under current owner Bo Barrett and winemaker Matt Crafton, who you spoke to, didn't you?
I did. I chatted to Matt about, all sorts really, the fires, climate change, their big replanting drive and sustainability in general. I also did rather cheekily ask him about the film Bottle Shock. Couldn't resist. Which tells the story of the Judgment of Paris with a focus on Chateau Montelena and the Barrett family. Anyway, I started by asking him just to set the scene for us.
So it's a beautiful December morning here at the northern end of Napa Valley. And for those of you that haven't visited Chateau Montelena before, we're located literally at the very top of the valley. So right where the two mountain ranges on the east and west flank meet at Mount St. Helena, that's where Montelena is. And it's a typical December morning here. Last night down around freezing. So, 0, -1 Celsius. beautiful frost this morning and sunny skies.
Okay, so just talking about this year, Matt. I mean, it's obviously been a tough year for everyone all around the world, certainly in terms of COVID. But on top of that, California and where you are in Napa have suffered devastating wildfires. Can you tell us about those and how they've affected the Napa wine industry?
It's been a challenge, especially given that it's occurred, 3 of the 4 last few years. And I don't know, I think on some level we're getting more resilient. That's true. But this year it was particularly devastating given how early they occurred. So in 2017 and 2019, the fires that erupted were later in the growing season, some even post-harvest. This year was unique in that the first fires began in August, carried through September. And for many wineries such as ours, we lost our entire red wine grape harvest this year.
You lost your whole harvest?
We were able to harvest our Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc ahead of the fires, but no red wines will be made by us in 2020.
I mean, I know that Chateau Montelena as well is the most beautiful grand stone building. Were you ever worried that was that ever under threat?
It has been, and we have a fantastic team here of people who take care of the property all during the year to make sure it's as fire safe as possible. And we obviously have incredibly dedicated first responders and firefighters who are here, and a really great community. So I think that concern is always there, and we're obviously most concerned about the sanctity of life more than anything else. But yes, there were certainly times where this property, this building, was under threat.
And in terms of you going back to the vineyards, you've lost your red wine harvest. Are you worried in any way about next year? How does that affect the vines for the future vintages?
That's a good question. So there's a lot of research on this actually out of Australia. Those poor folks have been dealing with wildfires and bushfires significantly longer than we have. And thankfully, as long as your vineyard doesn't physically burn, there are no lingering effects after a fire or smoke event.
And so the reason you've lost yours then is to do with the smoke taint?
That's correct. So all of our Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Zinfandel, Primitivo, all of those wonderful, delicious grapes were hanging out in this, Blade Runner-esque atmosphere of smoke. And we know just from research and understanding the mechanism for how everything works when it comes to how the grapevines process smoke and how that works its way through the vine itself, that there really isn't anything you can do to fix it.
So now that the immediate danger's over now, so the fires are out, I imagine in the short term it's about a massive kind of cleanup operation, salvaging what people can from the 2020 harvest, and keeping their businesses afloat if they can. But just looking at the longer term future for Napa in the face of what is obviously climate change. I mean, it's been said that the rate of temperature change in California is now at the highest it's been in a 1,000 years. And then these wildfires that would normally happen maybe every 6 years are happening virtually 6 times a year. How do you see the future for the region in that context?
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball, and I'm not a climatologist or a meteorologist. So I'll just lay that out there first and foremost. I think what you've said is certainly, I've heard it as well. And I think there tends to be a possibility to oversimplify some of the situations to make it digestible. I think we've got a few variables at work here, from what's going on from a climate perspective, a weather perspective. There are also some major forest management issues in the state of California that I think contributed to this. And if you look at historically, if you talk to some of the old timers who've been around in Northern California going back into the 40s and 50s and 60s, there were regular fires here. That's part of the landscape. It's part of the ecosystem here. And then when we stopped burning in the 1960s, 1970s, and let all of that brush start to accumulate, those regular fires became obviously less regular. But when they did occur, they were significantly more disastrous. So, I think there are a few things going on here, but I don't think there's literally one silver bullet to solve them. And I don't really think there's one explanation either.
And Chateau Montelena, and you as a winemaker, you're known for your red wines made from Cabernet Sauvignon, though. Ironically, it was the Chardonnay, wasn't it, that won the Judgment of Paris in 1976. So looking at those two varietals in particular, I mean, recently people have started to question the long-term viability. I mean, going back again to the climate change issue, as the climate warms, things get gradually ever hotter. There's even talk I read somewhere of them of getting off the Cabernet and Chardonnay train. What do you think about that?
I think that makes for really good headlines.
Sounded good to me.
Right. I'm not concerned about Cabernet in the short term. And like I said, I'm certainly not a climatologist at all. But what I can tell you is that if you look at, Vitis vinifera, vines are survivors. And I think that we're not 100% sure how any sort of climate changes are going to affect the Napa Valley directly. We have a very complicated and complex weather pattern here. Which is significant. I mean, significantly recognized in the fact that we can't predict the weather more than 2 days out. As we've been working on, replanting our estate vineyard over the last few years, we've changed our row orientation to make sure that during the hottest time of the year, the hottest part of the day, the sun's shining down on top of our canopies instead of on the fruit itself. We're investing more in technology to understand vine water status to help not only save water, but also improve quality. There are lots of these, small, I'd say, viticultural practices that we could do. And then, looking at more drought resistant rootstocks, those sorts of things, and then getting a better idea of again, the vine status during the growing season to understand ripeness a little better. And I'd say, specifically for Montelena, I mean, one of the brilliant things about, this winery specifically is that we're not driven to create a wine of a very specific profile. I mean, we create delicious, beautiful wines. That's really it. And so we're able to do that in a way where in some years we pick significantly earlier and some years we pick significantly later. And we're able to take advantage of those nuances of the growing season and creating something that's, delicious and long lasting. So there's kind of a philosophical piece of that too.
I mean, I'd love to just pick up on that actually, Matt, because I know that, originally Jim Barrett's idea was to produce European style wines that are very drinkable and age worthy, relatively lower in alcohol, not your classic Napa wines. And I know you're very keen to do that too. Just tell us a bit about how you go about doing that, because you are in actually the warmer part of Napa, aren't you? So how do you go about creating those more elegant, refined, if you like, old world style of wines?
I think it's first off, you have to think independently. And I think you can probably speak to this as well as I can. It's very easy to stampede towards a certain style that happens to be in vogue right now. Or maybe to, someone's specific palate you're making wine towards. We don't fall into either of those two camps. The Barretts, who are wonderful owners, have always treasured independent thought, creative people, and really the only directive we are given is to, make something that's beautiful, make something that's delicious, and then also make something that's ageable. And I think when you put on your winemaking hat and you look at kind of the left brain, sort of the analytical side, I guess, where you think about, well, what are the components that give wines the ability to age? We're talking about, the acid levels, tannin, alcohol, all sorts of those things. And then you have to put it together with that right brain creativity. And when those two come together in a way with a fundamental understanding of how flavors develop over time, how textures develop, what our specific piece of ground, what the potential is there. When you were able to combine all of those, you can create something that's really interesting and really exciting. And I'd say that if we had to put tie everything together with a bow, that pretty much encompasses it. I mean, we don't really have a style, just kind of like, when Michelangelo was sculpting, he wasn't like saying, I want to make sculpt a statue that looked like this. He just wanted to make something really beautiful and amazing. And he ended up sculpting like Michelangelo, because you can't help not doing something that's like you if you focus on the end goal of making something really wonderful. And so that's really, I think, how we look at things.
And what are the specific, I mean, every winemaker has their challenges, every viticulturist. What would you say are the challenges where you are? Is it heat related, so you do tend to harvest a little bit earlier, or what would you say are your main challenges?
So Calistoga is a really wonderful place, because we do see the hottest peak temperature during the day. But if you look at the amount of heat, summed up, and whether you use degree days or whatever units, we're actually not the warmest part of the valley, because we actually have the coldest nights as well. So we have this incredible diurnal temperature swing. And so for us, it's understanding, kind of to your point, the appropriate level of ripeness. What really encapsulates the overall theme and spirit of the vintage out in the field. That's the biggest creative challenge. How do you take the entire year and distill it into a single glass of wine? And so, and then thankfully for us, those really incredibly cool nights preserve the acid backbone. That really helps significantly with the ageability piece. So now it's about understanding, picking across these 80 acres. We'll do 40, 50 picks individually to come up with all of these different colors that we can then paint with in this really, hopefully, beautiful mosaic in our Cabernet. And the same thing is true in our Chardonnay.
Just moving on to sustainability. I know that's something that you're very, very keen on. What are you doing at Chateau Montelena to be more sustainable?
It's funny, that's definitely a buzzword, and it's gotten to be more trendy, but it's really been part of our DNA since the very beginning. The Barretts have always embodied a philosophy of literally leave things better than how you found it. And that's true across every piece of this company. So we were very early on one of the first wineries to go 100% solar. That's easy to check off and easy to put on a piece of marketing material, but it goes all the way down to composting coffee grounds and everything in between. And so we've always looked at, what is the right way and the best way to do this, because we have two really important assets here. We have our people and we have our piece of ground. And, my kids run through the vineyard, just like how our CEO, Bo Barrett, his kids ran through the vineyard. We want to make sure that this vineyard is in wonderful shape and only continues to improve over time. And thankfully, we have an amazing vineyard manager who also agrees with this. And I think as part of the Montelena team, you have to really believe that. And so it extends, like I said, from wine production to the vineyard, all the way to the grounds crew, to the folks who are serving our customers up in the tasting room. It's not a overt mission. It's just, this is how we operate.
So you're solar powered?
Yes.
What happens in the vineyard then?
So vineyard, as I mentioned before, we're looking at technological innovations that allow us to conserve water. That's a really big one. We cover crop essentially all year round. We don't use any synthetic fertilizers. The idea is that by having a microbiological understanding of what's going on below ground, and by taking care of the soil, by feeding the soil, it's like a bank, right? So every year we make a withdrawal by taking the grapes off the vine. Well, we have to make sure we make deposits as well. And so we'll selectively tailor our cover crops year over year, depending upon the soil status of the vineyard. And like I said, our vineyard manager does a great job with those things. So it's understanding that you have to invest, and it's a philosophy and understanding that we're playing the long game here. We're not thinking about the next year or the next 2 years. We're talking about, some of the vineyards we're talking about replanting now, we won't see the fruit from those until 2030. So who knows if any of us will be around at that point.
We may not.
But what about, the right thing.
Just looking, one of the biggest problems with sustainability and with the environment, if you like, our carbon footprint is the weight of glass. And I know that Napa Valley bottles do tend to often be pretty heavy, chunky bottles. Are you looking at all to lower your glass weights?
We've been on lightweight glass for 15 years. And so we use the absolute lightest bottle we can that has integrity. So if you go pick up a bottle of Montelena, you'll see it's a beautiful but simple champagne green, claret bottle. It's not one of those big, massive ones that feels like it's full when it's empty. No, again, this has been
always disappointing.
That's right, isn't it? And so, but no, this is, again, you brought up a great point. I mean, it's all of these little decisions over time. And so we always try to source California first, US second, North America third, to minimize shipment time and then the carbon footprint associated with that. It's all of these small decisions that we make that compound over time. And so, because what really matters is what's in the bottle, right? I mean, that's as long as it gets to you. And so that's a really great point. Thanks for bringing that up.
Can I ask you something maybe slightly more frivolous? There was a film Bottle Shock, wasn't there?
I think
it had a good cast. Alan Rickman was in there.
Yes,
it wasn't a great film. It was pretty panned, and it focused on the Barrett family. What did they think of it?
I think going into this, they understood this wasn't a documentary. I think we joked that it's like the Mighty Ducks go to Napa. And it was, I obviously wasn't there for the filming portion. I joined the winery literally right before they screened the film for the first time. But from what I understand, it was meant to be a fun film, somewhat fanciful with, I guess, the very rough, basic framework, carrying some truth. But I'll tell you what it did is that it certainly it opened up the wine world and made it more accessible to a lot of people who normally wouldn't even have considered even thinking about Napa Valley. So from that standpoint, I think that introduction was a really good thing.
So the Barretts were fine with the film. They were happy with it, were they?
Oh yeah, I mean, Bo is played by Chris Pine. How could he not be happy about that?
And I wonder, do you still get people coming? I imagine when I was watching, I was thinking, I wonder if people come and say, "Can I just try the Chardonnay, please?"
That's right. No, yeah, we absolutely do. And it's great because people come from all walks of life. Some folks have been wine drinkers for years and years and years and have never made it to California, or, hey, I don't drink Chardonnay at all, but I saw this movie and want to try yours. And we get lots of young people too, who happen to pull it up on Netflix or something like that. And you never know where it's going to go, but we've built a lot of fans that way.
Now, I'm going to ask you one last question. I think it's quite a difficult one for any wine lover. I would like you to tell me what in this strange year that we're living in, what would be your ideal lockdown wine? And it can't be one of your own.
Okay, and you'd like producer names or just regions, or?
I'd love to know exactly what bottle you'd be pulling out.
Okay, so I'll give you. How about if I give you a couple? Because we're going through a fair amount in our household these days.
Fair enough.
So the first one would be Champagne Bollinger Grand Marnier. And that's a really beautiful, delicious wine. If I were going to pick Pinot Noir, possibly a wine from up in the Willamette, maybe something from like Ponzi or a good producer up there. From Italy, I don't know, maybe Sandrone, Barolo, something like that. I love Nebbiolo. Really love Nebbiolo because I don't know how to make it, and I don't know anybody in California who does. And I think the last one would be maybe one of the Lalas from Rhone, from Gigal. So those would all be high on the list.
I might be coming and sharing your lockdown wines with you if that's okay.
I'm not saying I have them. I'm just saying that's what I would drink.
Let's find them somewhere. Oh, Matt, thank you so much. That's been absolutely brilliant. Welcome. Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I see. Okay, going off to share Matt's lockdown wines with him, are you? That's the way it is. Okay.
They were good.
Yeah, I can't believe you let him have more than one. That is totally against the rules.
Well,
I mean, is that favoritism?
He was very nice.
He was a very nice man, wasn't he? But anyway,
but you, let's face it, you have to love his choices, don't you?
They were pretty epic, I think.
I mean, Grand Marnier.
Well, you could say a lack of whites, not so much white wine in there. But actually, picking up on that and to move on, shocking to hear that they're not going to be making any red wine at all in 2020, isn't it?
I know. I can't imagine what that
blow.
does to a business. But yeah. But I mean, I think probably not atypical for this particular vintage.
You're right. I think there'll be a lot of people not making wines. I mean, it does remind me actually of we talked about it earlier, the Australia on Fire episode 2, season 1, episode 1, where we recommended the Clonakilla Shiraz, didn't we? And
Yeah.
then we had to,
And then,
to,
of course.
to add the fact that they weren't going to make any wine at all in 2020 either.
Yeah. But you see, that's the thing about smoke taint. It can just ruin a wine. And the worst thing about it is that it doesn't necessarily appear early on in the wine's life. It can be there in a sort of precursor form and then only manifest itself once the wine is in bottle and shipped. And that's potentially a disaster, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think the decision not to bottle may be the right one, even if it's really, really hard.
And it can be a terrible decision to make because obviously massive financial implications, and sometimes the wine won't be showing these characters when it's young or before it's bottled, and suddenly it will in the bottle. So you've got to kind of say, I think this will, therefore, and of course you can analyse. Anyway, I mean, it is shocking, and I think when he mentioned the whole kind of Blade Runner-esque scenario, that paints the picture really vividly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sort of devastating. I mean, apocalyptic, I think, probably be the words, Anyway, we really important to add, we wish all our Napa and California wine colleagues really well. I'm sure they'll prove resilient, a word that Matt used, and brilliant as ever. But now we're going to segue nice and neatly from the world of Chateau Montelena and Napa into the world of film.
Indeed we are.
I guess Blade Runner doesn't count in this scenario. At least I might have to rewatch it just to check, but I don't think they have wine in Blade Runner as far as I remember.
I'm not sure. Yeah, anyway, but we wanted to follow up on the theme of bottle shock, which I asked Matt about, and which we watched before I chatted to Matt.
Did I make you watch that, or did you make me watch that?
I think you might have made me watch it, but we'd never actually seen it, remarkably. And we weren't, to be fair, too wowed, were we?
No.
Really?
No, I was asked this on Twitter, and I said my response was great cast, great story, but just not a great movie.
It's just really cheesy, isn't it?
Mainly because it was hampered by one hugely dodgy wig. I mean, would we say that was a major barrier to our...
You have to watch this, guys, because honestly, that wig...
But important to say, as Matt said, it is quite fun.
It is. And it clearly went down okay with Chateau Montelena, and it's brought lots of people into wine and the winery and Napa, so that's definitely a positive.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a positive somewhere if you look hard enough. So this got us thinking, didn't it? What are the really great wine films or the wine moments in films?
I mean, are there any really great? Well, that was the question.
We'll come on to that,
really?
won't we? So, I asked that question on Twitter, and we got some responses, which we got here, haven't we? Now, just to say, initially we had a bit of a brain splurge, and we said what we come to when you say wine movies or wine moments in movies. Yeah, Bond obviously has to be in there.
Bond came in. Silence of the Lambs.
Silence of the
was
Lambs
on our list, wasn't it?
Ratatouille was definitely on our list. But, the kids we blame there. With Nell and I, we've got no one to blame but myself.
You could not.
The Princess Bride was an interesting one.
I can't remember why the Princess Bride.
There's a famous sort of scene with you have to choose. There's one glass of wine's poisoned, and you have to choose which one, and it's very funny. Anyway, a bit of fun. The Muppet on that Muppet movie.
Yeah. You put the Muppet movie in again. I had no idea why,
but more seriously, sort of Sour Grapes.
Yeah, Sour
we did
Grapes.
Enjoy that. It's a documentary,
that was,
but it is well worth watching.
Yeah, definitely a great
story. And then
story.
Somm, I think, was one we watched. There's been a few of those now, haven't there?
Yeah. But what about other people?
Yeah. So the suggestions came.
We had a lot
flooding in. Thank you, everyone. It was really, really fun, and just what we needed. Matt Wilkin, MS. Hi, Matt. Came in strongly by saying The Big Lebowski, which puzzled me. He said, considering how much confusion and chaos 2020 has brought into our lives, I say White Russians qualify as pandemic wine. Now,
not Black Russians.
Given the amount of White Russians that Jeff Bridges drinks in that film, I'd be worried, Matt, if that's your consumption levels.
My mum always used to drink Black Russians when when I was young. I'm sorry, Mum, I shouldn't have said that. Really,
nice oaky Chardonnay, maybe White Russian. There you go.
Anyway, David C championed the scene with Piat D'Or in Jaws, but that didn't. He didn't really get much support on that one, did he?
He didn't get any support. Sorry,
I don't know
David.
anything about that.
There was obviously a massive Jaws fan, and we'll have to rewatch to see if we spot.
No.
But it doesn't strike me as anything out of the ordinary, given the kind of fashion that was in. Remember the tight shorts and the kind of Jaws. It was all about that sort of era, wasn't it? Andrew C said, "I recall a nice Chianti being the right accompaniment to fava beans and liver." Thank you for not specifying the origin of the liver, Andrew. And of course, there were a few other voices in support of the Silence of the Lambs, which we mentioned with Hannibal Lecter. Yeah. It's often the case that is it me, or is the case that this wine tends to be the villain? It's the villain who likes the wine or brings the wine. It's often the case. We need more wine heroes.
Interesting. Because apparently Dominic P pointed out, didn't he, that it was Amarone in the original book, but they changed it to Chianti for the film. This was Silence of the Lambs. But yeah, you're right.
But because Chianti was better known than Amarone. People might not have known Amarone. Yeah, something like that. Okay. What else have we got? Sour grapes, didn't we? Yeah. I think William brought that in. He said, given so many scenes feature Tondonia. And there were quite a few supporters for that, weren't
there?
there?
There were actually, yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
And Carrie did say it was awesome.
Yeah. And then, did you mean worst wine movie? That would be Bottle Shock, said Peter McCombie, coming straight in there. I watched it and thought that one would find less wood in a Chippendale factory, said Tim, which was...
Depends what sort of Chippendale you're talking about, doesn't it?
Not that kind of Chippendale. Oh, come on.
Now, there was a shout-out for Lauren and Hardy by Richard S.
Yeah, thanks,
Again,
Richard.
don't quite know about that, but...
and then there were a long list of supporters for Sideways, weren't there? Which, on the basis of our entirely amateur straw poll, I think was probably the winner in terms of volume of responses. I laugh every time at the Merlot scene, said Lynn, while Maura said, in Italian it's un'ottima annata. Lovely movie. It sounds better. I think it's lovely in Italian,
Mr. Richards. Continuing the Sideways lovin', Ned P liked the bit where he drinks his nice wine in McDonald's from a paper cup.
It's a good moment.
Patrick said brilliant. Cheval Blanc 1961. Also the beautiful romantic rant about Pinot Noir. Hilarious. I'm going to watch again now over Christmas.
Yeah, so Patrick, we hope you enjoy that. Inspired by this, I think we might be doing some of the same. And Mark L, meanwhile, he threw a spanner in the works.
He did rather, didn't he? Yeah.
He said wine and golf are two things. I'm not sure where the golf, but where the connection came from. Wine and golf are two things that shouldn't have movies made about them. Let's look at the evidence. Tin Cup and Sideways, and just say never again. And now this did lead on to discussions about Caddyshack and Happy Gilmore on the golfing front. But Mark did conclude, sorry, but middle-aged is way too baked into the wine brand to make it a subject for Hollywood.
Oh, that makes me feel unhappy. Anyway, while I feel unhappy, let's praise both Sideways and Happy Gilmore, like Hardeep Singh Kohli, who noted that wine isn't the most fertile of film territory, and weird that there are plenty of food films, but so few wine. I think you then suggested this sounded like a project that needed doing. And then he mentioned Babette's Feast, which features Claude Vougeot, 1845.
I know, he pulled that one out of the bag. Thank you, Hardeep. And yes, let's work together. This could be something beautiful. Sideways is the clear winner, said Mike M. If you want an absolute clunker about wine, watch A Good Year, a comedy written and directed by two people who have absolutely no sense of humour. I don't know who wrote it and directed it.
I don't know. But rude. Tim Atkin, MW, agreed. He said A Good Year is really bad, but Ce qui nous lie is not bad, and features Jean-Marc Rouleau.
There's some really good suggestions in here, I think, which we'll be looking out for. I think we have a wine movie playlist lining up this holiday.
Our kids are going to love Christmas, aren't they?
We just
Let's watch wine movies.
Chris Kelly said, though, I love A Good Year. That was the dream. Get a vineyard in France, entertain the French ladies. Ended up with a brewery in Bedfordshire. And he ended with a slapping face emoji. Chris, it's not too bad. I think you do pretty well.
I think you do
for
fine.
what it's worth.
Ian also wanted to put a sheepish vote in for A Good Year, but only really because it starred Albert Finney and Marianne Cotillard.
Understand the logic there. Nick B said, The Barolo Boys, wine history and a perspective on the ever-changing dynamism of our wonderful industry. Sounds like a strapline for the movie, doesn't it?
Ratatouille treats flavour far more seriously than many films, commented our colleague Simon Woods, and we'd agree. And not just Cheval Blanc, but Chateau Latour as well. Matt W mentioned the making of programme of Ratatouille when they apparently sent the whole production team to Cordon Bleu in Paris for 6 months training.
Yeah, do you
now
know
that's the kind of film you want to work on, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? Yeah. Although I don't think that would be particularly easy. Another colleague of ours, Peter Dean, suggested Dial a Deadly Number, an episode of the original Avengers, apparently. And he said what happens in it is that Steed wins a blind wine tasting competition where he identifies the row of vines the wine was made from. You ever done that?
No.
No, neither have I.
I could do it for a film, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, anyway, this apparently in the film causes the villain's monocle to fall out.
There we go. We don't wear enough monocles, do we, these days?
Moment. It also has a great wine tasting in a cab between Steed and Emma Peel. But again, then he went on to say, he suggested The Jerk, the famous movie with Steve Martin, when Steve's drinking Latour 66, but asking for a younger vintage because he thinks the restaurant's palming him off with old rubbish, which is really funny.
You just called him Steve there, didn't you? Like he was your best mate.
Steve.
Best mate. Lawrence P, meanwhile, said, just been watching The Sopranos. All they seem to drink is Ruffino Chianti. Gotta get some. Now, Lawrence, don't be led by the mobsters. I think a good Chianti is undeniably a pleasure, but
slippery slope, Lawrence. Just be careful there.
Steady.
Daphne put forward Mondovino and did get a fair bit of support with that one. The documentary on the globalization of wine, which made a bit of a splash.
This is one for you, really. Nyan introduced some levity to the discussion by nailing his colours to the mast with The Simpsons without a doubt. Here we go, Peter Richards. The clip where Latour is mentioned, as well as an indifferent Rosan Segler. Nyan added, when I visited Rosan Segler a few years ago, I happened to mention that they were one of 2 Bordeaux chateaux name-checked in The Simpsons. They were rather nonplussed when I forwarded that clip.
I'm not surprised.
Do they have The Simpsons in France? They must do, surely.
Yes, they do, actually, funny enough. And we're just about to come on to that. So from Molyneux in South Africa, hi guys, they said, there are so many bad wine movies, it's not even funny. So, that really should have been the question we asked as well. What's your worst
probably.
wine movie?
Maybe that's the next one, isn't it?
But anyway, they carried on. They might be enjoyable in a guilty pleasure kind of way, but it's hard to get over the wine inaccuracies, such as the boiling fermentation in a good year and the Burgundian Pinot Noir, in inverted commas, in claret bottles in Paris, Wine and Romance.
Paris, Wine and Romance, that famous film.
Yeah, then they added, we almost forgot Crepes of Wrath episode of The Simpsons, where Bart is an exchange student in France and has to make wine. And I have to admit here to losing a lot of time going down a rabbit hole watching some of this episode. It's absolutely brilliant. It's one of the first series episodes, and it's where Bart does an exchange to France, where they force him to make wine adulterated with antifreeze.
This was hard research for you, wasn't it?
This was really important research. But what was great...
So they forced him to make wine out of antifreeze? They forced him to make wine
with antifreeze, so it's adulterated. But then Bart, he's basically been kidnapped. They're abusing him. They're putting him into servitude. And he goes to find a French policeman and he reports the crime that he's been sort of abducted and abused. And the policeman doesn't really take much notice. And then he reports the crime of adulterating the wine with antifreeze. And at that point, the policeman sort of jumps into action and says, oh, this is the proper crime. It was, anyway, a very funny episode. Well worth checking out.
If you hadn't guessed, Peter's quite a Simpsons fan.
So I think there could be something in the top 10 wine moments in The Simpsons. Let's get on to that. Come on.
But let's move on.
I want to hear that.
With Nail and I was cited by many, including Chris W., who forwarded the clip of what must be the only incidence, I think, in film history of an entire dialogue between 3 characters being made up purely of the word sherry.
Sherry. Anyway, Siab said, worth reading Dorothy L. Sayers' Montague Egg Stories, the wine merchant who solves crimes. Didn't know about that.
No.
And the bibulous business of A Matter of Taste, where spies are exposed in a blind tasting.
Now, a couple of people noted the Orson Welles commercials for Paul Masson. Do you remember those? Probably not. California Champagne, and there are some great outtakes of those on YouTube.
Where the great Mr. Wells is slightly worse for wear. Robin L. suggested, and we have to pronounce this, La Grande Vadrouille. He said, I've had the DVD for ages, but only watched it recently for the first time. Hilarious British-French comedy with amazing scenes at the old Hospice de Beaune and Meursault. I really want to see that.
Yeah. Anyway, just one or two more. Charles T., Ed Norton's character in 25th Hour, Spike Lee, 2002.
Tony Saplonk had some funny moments in it. I did watch a bit of that. It was quite funny.
You've really done your research, haven't you? Everybody's just giving you an excuse to watch movies, haven't they? And The Simpsons. Benjamin S. recommended The Secret of Santa Vittoria, 1969. How would you hide 1,184,611 bottles of wine from the Nazis?
Okay, there's a challenge.
No idea.
I think it's The Secret of Santa Vittoria, actually. But Tony
What
V.
did I say?
picked Tory. You said The Street.
The Street?
The Street is
I
featured,
can't even
but
read.
it is The Secret. Tory V. Picked out the scene in Parent Trap, where, do you remember that one, where precocious 12-year-old Lindsay Lohan
very
says,
good in
if
this.
you ask me, the bouquet is a little too robust for a Merlot, but then again, I'm partial to the softer California grape.
Love her. Actually really enjoyed Uncorked on Netflix, Vino on Lino, as many have said there are so many bad wine-related movies, so this was a surprise. I don't know who that was, but somebody...
So Lee Evans, well, it's from Vino on Lino.
I see, sorry.
Yeah. So Lee Evans said, Uncorked, worthy of committing some time to it, makes you consider diversity in the wine business too.
Mike N was also a fan of Uncorked and added Somm was good too.
One we had on our list. David G summed up well by recommending Mondovino. Bottle Shot was fun, but largely fiction. Sideways was entertaining, but really a buddy movie. Frankly, someone needs to make a great wine movie.
A good point to end on. We are available for hire.
Yeah, we are indeed. So at least, at the very least, hopefully some ideas for some good festive viewing there, or re-watching of the classics, which is always good to do at Christmas time, isn't it? Always with wine as the common theme. We'll certainly be doing a bit of that ourselves, I
think
hope.
we might. Do get in touch to let us know if we've missed out or overlooked any key wine movies or key wine moments in movies, or your favourites perhaps. You can contact us via social media, or if you want a star on the show, then leave us a message via the magic of SpeakPipe. It's very easy to do, and the link is on our site, susieandpeter.com.
Yeah, now if you like what you've heard, please do leave us a positive rating and review on your audio platform of choice. It really does help, and we massively appreciate it. And of course, if you haven't done so already, please do hit that subscribe button. It's all for free, and it means you just get the latest episodes forwarded directly for your attention.
Thanks to Matt Crafton of Chateau Montelena, and thank you, as ever, for listening. Until next time, cheers.